We have this evening Carlos Boker, who is currently teaching at the University of Iowa. He was born in Chile, and he's lectured and been a guest professor around the world, for examples, India and Germany. And he has come to the United States and been teaching at the University of Iowa and hopes to travel to Asia currently. He is teaching in film and broadcasting, TV production this quarter. He's taught a course on Third World Cinema, Film and Revolution, and his current interest involves theater for social change. The film that we're going to be seeing tonight is on the other end of the spectrum of the Brazilian Cinema Nova movement. I don't know if any of you were here this noon. We saw one that would be at the very beginning of that movement, which was made in 1963. And so we've tried to present the spectrum here. And Carlos will discuss the film and Latin American cinema for 45 minutes, say, and then we'll show the film. And for any of you who are interested in a more informal discussion with him afterwards, you can stick around here and we may adjourn to some place like the Grub Steak or something for a discussion after that. Thank you.
All right, what I'm supposed to speak about actually is not Latin American film, but Latin America and film, which should somehow or other allow me to cover a wider multitude of sins, which is what the whole thing is about. Now, my approach to this would be actually, I cannot really tell you what Latin American film is, because there is too much of it. And it would be impossible in one lecture to cover the whole spectrum of it. But I think what is important to understand before you see today's film, and for those of you who have seen the films that have been shown yesterday and the day before yesterday, is this completely different approach to cinema that you find in Latin America as compared to cinema as it is seen in the United States as what is usually called Hollywood cinema, which means cinema that is very perfect technically, that is very clean, that is perfectly illuminated, that has a certain number of sequences, and that insofar as content is concerned, has also a certain number of lines which are almost invariable from one to the other. Now, well, I do hope you can get the recording by move around, but sitting still, standing still, does look so silly. What I would like to say to start with is that Latin American cinema today, starting with the new Latin American cinema, actually the film that we saw today at noon, Vidas Secas, Pereira dos Santos, Brazil, 1964, and finishing in this stage with today's film, 1969, Laura Rocha, Antonio dos Mortos, is an typical expression of the Latin American search for a new voice. Now, by a new voice in Latin America, we mean mainly trying to find our real roots, that is, those that combine the strength of our indigenous cultures with the richness brought into Latin America by European influences. By indigenous cultures, I do not necessarily mean our Indian heritage, but I mean our Indian heritage as combined with Spanish, eventually Portuguese, Catholic influences from the time of the conquest on. Latin America is, discussing this a couple of classes this afternoon, is a culture that has been for many years a victim of schizophrenia, in which on one hand, on the right hand of course, you had what in Germany was called not so many years ago the Hochkultur, the high culture of the white people that are proud to be, oh, we are the French of Latin America, we are the English of Latin America, we are the Germans of Latin America, we are never the Latin Americans of Latin America. It was particularly true in my country, of course, which was one of the most alienated countries in Latin America. And on the other side, on the left hand, of course, there was the indigenous culture. These are the Indians, because the Indians are not people like us. This division in different cultures was, of course, also, or is still today, an expression of a division in different classes, starting with the lower people, the Indians, and going all the way up to what is called in good Latin America, and which you so call today via secos, the people, gente, said in today's film, we say in Chile, la gente, and Argentinians speak of la gente como nosotros, people like us, that is the decent. Now, the new Latin American culture, and within the new Latin American culture, the new Latin American cinema has tried to cut through this and decide, come on, I mean, there are only people and everybody is people, and everybody is important. And the main point about Indian cultures in Latin America, about indigenous cultures in Latin America, is that they provide something that is typically us. Now, why was it important to have something that was typically us? Because we had been enveloped, we had been under a landslide of absolutely foreign influences. And because our cinema, from the 30s and 40s onward, had been a cheap imitation of Hollywood. And it was to Hollywood, more or less like what Kmart is to the real side. So on this Kmart cinematic culture, we were paying homage to the richer countries, to the countries that had a culture that was completely different from ours, but that looked and sounded modern, perfect. And that at the same time had, of course, the advantage of being commercially very possible. The films that were being made in the 40s, even in the 30s, in the 50s, even in the 60s, and are even made today by the commercial part of the filmmakers industry, particularly in Mexico, in Argentina, were films in which the values were usually values of a Latin American middle class, with very little relation with our problems, because it was a middle class that did not even respond to what middle class in Latin America is. It was a middle class that looked upward, one would have to say, to either the United States, or if you went a step further up in the middle classes, to Europe. All of this produced then a cinema that produced, that following the models of the middle class, was sold mainly to the lower classes, who were the ones that went and saw it. Because these films were, of course, produced in Spanish, thought and written in Spanish, and were shown to audiences in all of our countries that did not want to see films that were spoken in English, because they couldn't understand them, and they couldn't relate to them, whilst they felt they could relate to these commercial productions that were spoken in their own language. Now, in 1950, there were already a couple of Argentinian films and a couple of Mexican films that took a different approach to the problem of Latin America, that decided Latin America is something else. We are something else. We have our own culture. Our own culture is important. And on top of that, we have a poorer class, both of workers and of peasants, as of lumpen, of sub-proletariat, that belong to us, that represent us also, and that are our main problem. Now, if we Latin Americans do not show our own problem in our own ways, we will show it. If we do not show them, we will never recognize them. If we do not recognize them, we will never make anything to change them. So this brought about in Mexico films like Buñuel's Los Olvidados in 1954, which was a very harsh indictment of urban sub-proletarian groups, which even today is a film that can be seen without having data at all. So today is quite as harsh and strong as it was 25 years ago. And then in 1959 came in Brazil the film that you saw. Today, Vidas Secas is a film about the one part of Brazil that has interest more than any other Brazilian writers, Brazilian sociologists. It was a film about the part of Brazil that Brazilian sociologists consider to be the start of the geography of, a form of geography of hunger. And it showed the problem of landless peasants who were forced to migrate from one place to another, not to make money, simply to try to make enough to eat. And in Pereira dos Santos' film, the cry they are asking for is, why can't we get enough to eat? We want nothing else. And the supreme luxury that they, in a sort of an antiphonic discussion, when they speak about the Senhor Tomás, the beginning and at the end of the film, they're saying, well, perhaps we could someday be like Senhor Tomás, who was really Eugene, who was really people, in the very house in which he lived, and who had a leather bed. And this theme of having a leather bed in which to sleep in as the supreme luxury of their lives is what actually marks the film, just as the film is marked in the beginning by the sacrifice of one character. It is killed because they have nothing to give it to eat. And the parrot is on the other side used, and they had to eat it. And the film ends with the main couple and the two children in exactly the same plight they were in the beginning of the film, going to another place, find enough to eat, and forced to kill the dog, because the dog is sick. It is not used. It's not used anymore. So this extreme poverty, that in some sense, that in relation to other people, that in relation to the powers that be, excludes dignity, but at the same time presupposes a basic dignity which you see throughout the film. Because the people that make it, the people that are the representatives of these group of migrant workers are filled with the dignity of the people who have nothing, who have less than nothing, but who nevertheless are very obviously people, reduced to the minimum, but within this minimum, making it very clear that they are persons and not abject things. Now, this film then marks an extraordinary renaissance of cinema in Latin America, which has its culmination when, in 1969, the film we're going to see tonight, Antonio das Mortes. And Antonio das Mortes can be read, of course, in many different levels. It can be read as magic realism, although somebody said today that I think it's a very good point, prefer the word realism, magic, to describe it. From the realism of Vidas Secas, or the first Brazilian film of Cinema Novo, it is discovered that much more can be said about the country. The country can be shown and explained much better if you leave these European socialist points of perfect socialist realism in order to enter into what our continent is, into the realm of magic. Because magic will somehow or other explain much better that which we are. So that you will find that there is more the elements of magic and the elements of non-logical thinking, or thinking that might be logical, but it is not logical in the Cartesian line, as we, as belonging to European traditions of thought, used to see. Now, Antonio das Mortes can be read also as a myth, because the main person, Antonio das Mortes, who has already appeared in other films, Calvin Rocha, is 5 years older than this one. Antonio is originally a cangaceiro. That is to say, he is a sort of Latin American Robin Hood. He belongs actually to a fraternity of almost bandits who try to avenge the poor. And he has left his position as cangaceiro to become Yagus, to become a man who is paid by landowners to keep the peasants subservient. But then Antonio is touched by grace, by social redemption, by whatever you want to call it. And he becomes again, and no pun intended, with a vengeance, the avenger again. And then he is again the terrible figure that will avenge the poor, that will avenge the landlords, the peasants, those that are oppressed. Now, all this is shown within a scenario and within a landscape that is filled with omens, that is filled with beata, that is filled with religion, with prophets, with false religion and with false prophets. It is filled with a lot of elements that have been attacked by leftist intellectuals in the richer countries, particularly where leftist intellectuals are different from ours. Has been attacked because of its leaving aside orthodox revolutionary thought. How can you speak of revolution in the film we're going to see now, when these people and the author of the film speak so much about religion, speak so much about the mystics and about mystique? How can you concile those things? Well, as a matter of fact, living in Latin America, or living in any other country of the world, for that matter, you can, because you have to go back to that which you are in order to fight, for that from your own point of vantage. And your own point of vantage is very obviously the point from which your whole tradition has started. And very obviously, our whole tradition is indigenous, plus European, Spanish, Portuguese, black, and most definitely, in one way or another, Japanese, for good or for bad. But that is there, that is a reality that is inescapable. So you will better understand the film, and you will better understand the social and the revolutionary implication of the film if you take all of these different and apparently contradictory elements into account. Now, as Antonio das Mortes is part of the Cinema Novo in Brazil, there are a number of other manifestations of the same new spirit in other Latin American countries. There is Argentina, which has also a new wave of cinema, and whose, let's say, highest expression is one of the better done dialectic filmic documentaries, which is Solanas and Gentinos, La Hora de los Hornos, The Hour of the Furnaces, which I believe was shown here last year, which is a film of great interest. It is a composition of different documents, different filmic documents, presented, and that is very important to take into consideration too. They are not using a new form to presenting them. They are presenting them mainly in the form of commercials. The people who did it used the same form that the establishment, quote unquote, uses to sell their product. And said, now this is our product, and we are going to use your weapon in order to show how we don't believe in you. So La Hora de los Hornos, The Hour of the Furnaces, is another expression of this revolution in Latin American cinema. And then there is at the same time revolution in cinema in Chile, which produces a number of extremely interesting works of varying degrees of good or bad quality, but which have in common, as Chilean cinema and as Latin American cinema, its absolute dedication to social causes. That is, their paradigm is the paradigm of the third world. Their paradigm is we live in a world that has to be changed. And in order to change this world, it is not sufficient to make some cosmetic changes that will allow things to seem better. What we need is not the alliance of progress. What we need is a change of structures. Now, this change of structures in all Latin American countries means two things. It means changing the feudal structure of the land. It means changing the means of production that are in the hands of a very small, usually foreign minority. And it means stopping the dependence on capitalists from other countries. That is to say, stopping imperialism. Now, this is the common paradigm to all of the cinema novel. You can accept it, you cannot accept it, but at least you must, for the record, accept it if you want to understand what Latin American cinema, and in general, what Latin American literature and poetry are today. You must say, all right, this is what Latin Americans want to say. This is the point of departure. Now, understanding this, we will see what the film is about. Now, for all of you who are in cinema here, the usual analysis of cinema made in the United States in particular, and in the other richer countries in general, is let us see the form of this film. Let us make a strong, intelligent, perfect analysis of how the film was made, of how perfect it is, of how we cut from one use to another. In the Latin American new film, nobody cares. You try to make a film which is understandable. You try to make a film that can be seen without being bored to death by people who don't sort of believe it. And you try to make a film in which you say as clearly as possible that which you have to say. this very often means making extremely bad films. This during, I don't know, this summer of our Latin American Festival, you could go and see, and then you knew, all right, this film made in Colombia, or these 10 films made in Colombia, you will have Camilo Torres, 9 of them, and you know that whenever a picture of Camilo Torres appears, everybody will get up and will applaud. The film will be a success. The same thing for many years happened. As soon as Che Guevara is in one film, people will stand up, they will applaud, this is Che Guevara, so this is fantastic thing to say. So that was, of course, a disadvantage of this purely ideological view. But still, the primacy of content over form was usually cleverly accomplished. And I would say it has been very cleverly accomplished in all of the films that we have been able to see here, particularly those the one that we're going to see today. Now, I think that more or less covers the birth and the importance of what we are trying to show today. What I think is important to take into consideration is who are these filmmakers fighting against? Because to make a film, of course, I mean, you originally need a small camera, a 16 millimeter camera would be enough, even 8 millimeters would be enough. You go out, you get a bit of film, and you shoot, and that's it. Now, even if you are a genius, what you shoot with a 16 millimeter camera and your whatever, 1,000 feet of film, even if you're a genius and you make something fantastic, the problem is you have to show it. Who's going to see it? Very good documentaries are, unfortunately, more often than not, made for people who like very good documentaries. Now, people who like very good documentaries are very often people who belong to the left. So you're making leftist films for the left. And, well, so what? Who are you paying anything due to? I mean, somebody tells me, listen, we must liberate Chile from fascism. I've said this before, yes, so what? What we need is the possibility of telling those who don't know it. So what we would need is a net of distribution. And that possibility of distribution is unfortunately what we lack. So the filmmaker who is trying to make these films has that basic problem. On top of that, he has another problem. He will usually make films that denounce a bad situation either in the country or in the city. And of course, the people who are in charge of the city and of the country are the people that belong to the establishment, people that want to know change. And of course, I mean, you will get into a big hacienda, you will get into one of the big latifunda, and the owners' watchdogs, which are very often the police, taken by the state, will come out with a shoot gun. And they'll say, well, what are you doing here? This is private property. No, the private property is very often 300,000 hectares, really. But it is private property. And this property belongs to me. You have no right to come in and report when it's being shown. So that's, of course, another hurdle. The other hurdle that you must pass is very obviously the one of language. Language in the sense of knowledge, in the sense of how am I going to say this so that it is seen, heard, and understood by the highest possible number of people. If you do things that are very simple, you will be accused by your fellow intellectuals for doing Pavlovian things. I mean, you're just playing black and white games, and that's too simple. If you do things that are too complicated, you will be choosing language that nobody really wants to get to will understand. So, where should you draw the line beside this ideology? this I will not do. In this way I would say this, in that way I would say that. Antonio das Mortes is a good case in point. Marxist, North American Marxist, and let's say cinematic reviews that have a more or less Marxist or socialist position have attacked it strongly because they consider it is not strong enough. Then of course nothing else is strong enough. Unless you put a bomb under somebody's car. That might be strong enough, it doesn't last long. And then you put a bomb under somebody's car, another car comes in, somebody looks exactly like the one with the bomb in the way. So I mean, what is strong enough? What is the best land? Well, I don't have an answer. I wish I had. Commercial cinema will sometimes say the same thing. Costa Gardens, a good case in point. State of Siege, Z, a good case in point. But they are accused of having been co-opted by the establishment. All right, so Costa Gardens, but I mean, his film was paid for by Universal, whoever it is. If Universal paid it, it can't be good. Anything that's good for General Motors is not good enough for me. So, where is the line that we should draw if we want to make a new cinema that is really significant? The Chilean filmmakers have made quite a number of interesting films, but most of them are only relatively good. Almost all of them are not seen by anybody. Now, the French speak of making of necessity a virtue. The fact of the fascist coup, the fact of all the thousands and thousands of people that have been killed and tortured, has called attention to our problem. So now, fortunately, Chilean films are interesting anyway, not because they're good, because they're Chilean. Everyone wants to see, what do these strange tortured people have to say, and how are they going to say it? So that has brought something good. People have gained a new interest. The last point I would like to make is when you do these films, you try to be very clear. When you do these films, you are thinking of a certain audience at a certain moment, in a certain place. These films that are basically ideological and political are usually cut to measure for a certain group. The group changes. So the films often, after a very short time, seen today, critically how it has aged. The Power and the Land, the beautiful film, or Salt of the Earth from the United States also, 53. You see it today, and unless you have the knowledge, the patience, and the love to put yourself back into 1953, remember the other carnage, that gun one. You decided the film says nothing. I mean, I know all of this, of course. Today, 1978, would not be different time. But the film, as art piece, has aged. You cannot see it anymore with pleasure, unless you are a film lover. And then you will see it as a sort of moral duty. It's a moral duty without knowledge. I mean, try to see things without enjoying them. Well, some films pass that ordeal, and 10 years after they have been made, they are quite as interesting as they were when they were. A number of documentaries on Latin America are that. I am hoping that most of the cinema novel and most the